Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
What I'm about to say is not to take away from any other guests we've had on the show, but this is one of the most inspiring conversations V and I have had. We covered some really fascinating topics, especially with Mitch's perspective on the shift towards in-house marketing, the evolution of marketing and agencies, how AI is playing into that, evolving nature of employment, and there's just so much in here. I really hope you enjoy the show. This episode's been sponsored by Quadical, fractional marketing leadership using evidence-based marketing practices. That's quadical.com.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Marc Binkley and Vassilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
Welcome to Sleeping Barber. Today we are so lucky to have Mitch Joel. Hard to describe Mitch all in one little short bio, but I'll do my best. So an entrepreneur, investor, global keynote speaker, co-founder of ThinkersOne, which is a really cool platform.
That's awesome.
Yeah. For bite-sized thought leadership from the best thinkers in the world. So if you're ever running a meeting and you need somebody with really great insights from somewhere else in the world, that's a great platform and a tool. Former president of Twist Image, or Twist Image, I guess, if you're from Quebec, the digital marketing agency that sold to WPP, named to the Thinkers 50 radar list, author of 6 Pixels of Separation and another book called Control-Alt-Delete. Mitch, welcome to the show.
Gentlemen, good to see you. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited. I kind of just stole this little blurb from your website because I honestly think this is so great.
What did it say?
An opening though.
What did my mother write?
Well, yeah, exactly. When brands like Google, Walmart, Lego, Shopify, Microsoft, Procter & Gamble, Cisco, and Unilever want to know what's next for them and their customers, they call you. Given all the technological change that always is, like AI is the biggest thing that has been talked about for the last probably 2 or 3 years now. There's so much changing customer behavior, marketing teams, business operations. So we figured if they call you,
we should call you.
We should call you.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great. So just to start a little briefly, like for people that don't know who you are, you originally started in the music business, ended up here. You've got this really impressive resume, global keynote speaker. When you think back in your career and looking at the dots and how they connect, what are your thoughts about like all the paths that you took?
It's a great question because you're right. I started in the very late 80s. I was very young, my teenage years, as a music writer. My first job actually was interviewing Tommy Lee from Motley Crue, which is a bizarre experience, especially considering I was a huge Motley Crue fan. So it was like a big, fun thing to do. And I went then into publishing magazines. And the minute I started publishing magazines, you realize it's not just writing or the artists you want to cover, but you are literally running a media platform. And at the time, this is pre-internet. So I'm doing everything from graphic design with my business partner to figuring out which photographs, to which articles, to who should go where, to figuring out the ads, to selling the ads, to getting the ads placed. And it was in that moment that I realized that my real passion is around something in the media brand space. And I'm not sure that I even really understood what that meant. But at the same time, tangentially, I always loved technology. I came from a very traditional lower middle class family. We were 4 boys. And I think what my parents did strategically, tactically, or maybe financially was they would just give us one thing to share as a gift. Right. And it was fairly generous in the sense of we had the very early versions of Pong and then Atari and television and then the very early stages of computers. And I remember getting that Atari 800 computer and just being really fascinated with it. And again, at the time, we had magazines like Compute, so you would like type in all the code to try and get like the little guy to bounce off of the trombone or something ridiculous like that. And you screw up 2 lines, you were a kid, and it would never really work well. But I was that person that was always interested in that. And then, magazines, I loved magazines. I have, really vivid memories of going to the corner store and just knowing intuitively when the new issue of, Hit Parade or Metal Edge or Circus or whatever was happening or Rolling Stone, because I had reread the previous month so many times. Yeah. And so all of this happens just fortuitously and through, basic privilege, that connectivity and modems. And suddenly I'm experiencing bulletin board services and connecting to other people who like the music I like. And then obviously very early stages of the internet and then the web browser. Mm-hmm. And when I saw the web browser, I remember in particular, there was music news and it would update it every day, like 3 items or something. And I thought, well, coming from publishing magazines, this is very transformative. And it was that moment where I had that catalyst kind of shift, that existential crisis of which way am I going to go? And I really felt like this has to be the future. This really has. And I say that now with a lot of humility because there was nothing saying to me it would be, just, gut instinct. And so here I am publishing music magazines. At that point, I was publishing actual music magazines, writing for others, putting it on what we would call the internet in the very early 90s, meaning it was just individual web pages. I remember I think it was like 92, we had a cover story on one of the magazines called The Net. And the breakthrough innovation at that time was hyperlinks, the fact that you could just link from one page to another. Yeah. So, really early days of that. At that point, I grew somewhat dissatisfied with the music business in the sense of I felt it was really going in one direction and the industry was somewhat holding itself back. There were some artists that were being a bit more progressive with web pages and stuff like that. And so through weird circumstance and introductions, I met this local company where I live in Montreal that was building at the time something called a meta search engine. Mm-hmm. And the idea then was that basic search engines were not great. You had AOL, you had a bit of Yahoo, a couple of others. And so the startup had the idea of grabbing all of these search results to create one search result, one that could go through all of them faster and get you to a better result. And this worked, really well. I have to say that we sat at the precipice. We were there before Google. We had talked about things like ranking search results based off of how much somebody's willing to pay you, which became, the model of the internet. We introduced ideas like if you would search for words like cancer or liver disease, it would be at the time Dr. Coop, and we would go to these providers and say to them, hey, we could have a little banner ad on top of the search that's specific to your exact keyword. And we did homepage sponsorships. We were doing, run of network, very early days of internet advertising. And so it's amazing to think that we were building models and trying to follow existing models in a world where, those things, didn't really exist at that scale. Yeah. From there, I got recruited, and that was through the whole .com boom bust and echo, and it was the whole up and down of it. But I made it through that first bust for sure. Yeah. And then we had again locally, there were some people that I had met through community that were doing stuff around mobile content. And again, we think, well, okay, smartphones. There was no smartphone. Yeah. There was no mobile web browser at the time. It was just carriers had a deck, like your little LED screen, and you would go to one, and one of them had some news, one of them had like some sports score, and their vision was you're going to have big brands on these small screens. And I stayed there for a short while, but I learned a ton. They actually got around the financing, and I got fired in the round of financing. They didn't get as much as they wanted. They wanted to have a very successful exit with this company. Ringtones came in, things like that. It was at that point that I did some PR. I was working for a PR agency that specialized in technology, but it was, much more infrastructure PR, and tech was more B2B and hard. It wasn't exciting for me. I realized I really wasn't happy. And that's when I decided maybe the music industry has changed. And so I reconnected with some of my peers and friends and wound up launching a music label called Distort Entertainment, which for those in Canada, they might recognize because we signed 2 significant bands, Alexis on Fire and City in Color. Yeah. And that was working out, and it was fun. Very early days, we had very minor hopes. I didn't realize you had
signed them so long ago. Yeah. Oh, that's wild.
Yeah, it would have been like, 2000-ish, maybe a bit later than that. So at the time, I had met my business partners at Twist Image, the digital agency. So again, we're talking like 2002-ish probably. And I just decided like I'm really into this digital media thing. And so I sold my shares back of the label to my business partner at the time who, of course, like a few months later, the band's broke and it was just huge. And I was like, oh God, I hope I made the right choice here because, you know, he's busy, you know, buying motorcycles and homes. And I'm like trying to figure out if I can afford lunch, right? It was like pretty brutal. And, you know, again, fortuitous time, think about 2002 to build a digital agency.
Yeah.
So we saw social, we saw everything come in.
Yeah.
I started blogging, 6 Pixels of Separation. I started podcasting very early. And through that, it built platform, which got the trade industry associations to be interested in the content we were creating. It was kind of heresy. You know, I was out there saying digital is going to be TV and radio and all this stuff. I mean, now it seems so silly, but back then it was, you know, quite the affront to a big industry.
Yeah.
And we built this agency on great work, great clients, getting really involved with large national, multinational brands. Through that, got introduced to some speaking opportunities, and then that became something. And then we started realizing we could monetize thought leadership through these channels. And so there was speaking, there was the books you talked about, the podcast, the blog. We had a very successful run until we were approached to be acquired. And we thought it was a great opportunity for the agency to really scale internationally because we were looking to do like something bigger. We were 4 business partners. We had done well. We had a lot of big brands. We had done some really impressive work, but we wanted to scale it. And we really believed that that would be the opportunity. And it turned out it was. When we joined WPP, we became an agency called Mirum, which actually unified a whole bunch of other agencies. And, you know, so we went from, you know, 100 and whatever it was, 2 offices to when we left, which was, you know, 4 or 5 years after acquisition. Mirum was probably close to 3,000 people in 30 countries. You know, we were part of the leadership team. It was very, very exciting.
Cool.
And then, I left and started just down this journey of creating content, building out ThinkersOne, the new startup that I have with one of the business partners from the agency, Aubrey, who's here with me, and just, you know, enjoying the opportunity to invest, to get involved, to be an advisor, to be on boards, to get really deep into the innovation, technology, media that I just love so much. And having ThinkersOne just lets me dog food everything and just try all of these things because back then, ThinkersOne probably would have been too small to be a client of the agency, but it's really interesting to be on that side and work with partners and agency partners again. So it's just been a very fun and fulfilling run. And to tie it all back with a bow, about 10 years ago, I started another podcast called Groove, the No Trouble Podcast, which is available at notrouble.com. It's not my site. But I basically interview bass players every single month. I played a little bit of bass and had fun doing that and met these guys and thought this would be a fun, creative thing to do. Like I have 6 Pixels of Separation where I interview thought leaders and authors. I could do this with bass players and have a little throwback to my passion for music. So that's my little side project that I do. And it's been 10 years every month and also just so much fun to do. It's great.
It's awesome.
Man.
Such a fascinating career.
It's crazy, right? Isn't it fun? Yeah.
You took me back there quite a bit. You were talking about the early even before .com BBS systems that would have been, you know, bulletin board systems for those that listen that may not know what that is. You talking about like searching the internet. I remember at the time I used to use Webferret to search the internet, to search the web. So, man, that is like Marc said, the holy smokes, that's a very, very unique journey. But I think it's also very reflective of many of us that, you know, sometimes get into our field either by accident or, you know, you just never know. Like marketing is this melting pot of individuals that come from fascinating backgrounds that makes this, I would argue, our discipline so incredible.
Well, the discipline of marketing is really fascinating. We got very involved in our community. So that would be things like at the time IAB, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, in particular the Canadian Marketing Association, where I sat on the Digital Marketing Council in the early days, but then became the actual chair of the Canadian Marketing Association. And every year we talk about membership. And what you realize is that every company, small, medium, large, B2B, B2C, has and needs marketing.
Yeah.
And it's actually weird when you really think about that, because then you're like, you're an industry association, but it's for retail. It's for software. It's for food. It's for travel. Like, it's literally everything. Yeah. And what you realize in that is people think you come to it in a different way. I think it's actually a very unifying industry, actually. What's unique is the shift. The shift when I started it wasn't what we would call a destination industry. You didn't wake up and say to yourself as a young person, I want to be a marketer when I get older. And maybe we still don't. But it's become more of a respected, understood, and powerful component of a corporation or brand or what they have to do. And so I think that's changed a little bit, but I think it's more that, which is it wasn't a destination, and it services every industry at every level. And that can make it feel a little bit amorphous. Yeah. But then when you think about it, it's like, to me, the more questionable thing I have now is like, what's the role of an agency? Only because if you are a brand and you don't own the role of marketing, what are you doing? Yeah. Now, again, in the old days, they didn't, because marketing was a cost. It was an expense. Yeah. And they didn't want that on the P&L. So having an agency, well, they handle our marketing. It was traditionally just advertising back then. Yeah. But in the modern world, I'm not saying there's not a role for agencies at all. It's just something that's really interesting in terms of how the relationships and dynamic changes as businesses have to own marketing. They have to.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So like why don't we dig into, we're going to bounce all over from what we originally prepped, but I think the agency, I mean, especially because you came in, and that was one of the first times I met you, and I've said this to you, but you did this presentation in Calgary right around the time when I first moved here, or a few years afterwards anyway, The Art of Marketing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was right around the time that 6 Pixels had come out, and it was I think the takeaway I had from it was everyone's connected. Your business should be connected to everyone, something to that effect.
Yeah.
And at the time, it really inspired me, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, there's something to this internet thing." And it really shifted, because I was in traditional media, and then to me, that was like, okay, well, I got to get this shit figured out, because clients are going to ask, and I could probably use it for lead gen for myself, which would be great, that I didn't have to cold call everybody all the time. So there's this kind of shift there around that period of time for me, which is when I started getting more involved with agencies and getting more involved with brands and thinking more about how all that stuff works. From your side, and looking at the change from like the social period to now we're in the AI period, and having been working in an agency during that, I guess that span, like how does the agency brand relationship change in your mind, as we went from the digital era, social era, to now this AI era?
And now a short word from our sponsor.
This episode was sponsored by Quadical. Did I say that right? Quadical?
You did. Quadical. Yeah.
Quadical. Mark, what is it?
Well, V, I'm glad you asked. Quadical is my own company, actually. So, I'm the Sleeping Barber Podcast co-host with you, but I also have my own company. And so I'm happy to sponsor the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
Love that.
Because I give so much time to it. But Quadical is a fractional marketing leadership firm where we specialize in evidence-based marketing. And we do consulting work for companies typically between $30 to $300 million, and helping them navigate some of the challenges that people have, like, I know something's broken, but I'm not quite sure how to fix it, nor do I have the time to fix it. Fair. And so that's where we help out a lot of people.
Well, I'll speak for Mark as well, because you're wearing your Quadical hat right now. We appreciate your sponsorship of the Sleeping Barber Podcast. And for all of those that may be interested, we do have a whole bunch of sponsorship options. Always looking to bring on new sponsors. We have a lot of creative ideas that can really help across a global audience.
Thanks, V.
No, thank you, Quadical. We appreciate your business.
And now back to the show.
Yeah, I think it depends on the services and offering of the agency, actually. What we learned early on is we could probably do everything traditional advertising. We had very creative people. We could probably do direct mail or whatever it was. We were focused exclusively on digital. So if you think about that era, most brands were still sitting in the mindset of like, tell me again, like, why do I need a website? Like, what's this going to do?
Yeah.
We weren't as advanced. And so what I loved is being a part of the transition from convincing businesses why they need it to being the place that businesses need to connect to. Like we quickly shifted as the world changed from here, let me explain why you need us, to everybody knocking on our door. Like, we really need this. Like, we're falling behind. So, that's one aspect of it. And then you had just massive shifts, right? Social changed it from the broadcasting model of like one to many to more one-to-one, which is that idea of 6 pixels of separation. How do you connect your business in a world where everybody is connected and having very real conversations or interactions and building some sense of community? And where does a brand fit into that? So suddenly you have a very wide and long runway to help businesses really adopt to the new conversation, which is what that was. Then you had to shift very quickly to e-commerce. So I was in the phase of people saying like, oh, well,
I keep forgetting that was.
Like back then people were like, I'm not going to put my credit card on the internet. Exactly. Like, what are you, crazy? And then seeing, from very big infrastructure e-commerce players like your Demandwares and others being a part of, at the time there was shop.org, which is now the National Retail Federation. Up here in Canada, we had the Retail Council of Canada, got involved with that very, very quickly because I was like, everyone's going to be shopping. We'd already seen the Amazon-ish and eBay models and PayPal make their way. So you could feel that tsunami coming back up here to Canada and then just, exploding nationally. So, we're sitting here thinking, how do you get Walmart to $1 billion in sales, compared to Amazon, which already was already accumulating billions in Canada. So how do you do things like that? That was an interesting part of it. Then mobile came very quickly with smartphones and iPhones. And how do you create for that? Should it be just like a smaller version of the web? We saw the app development come in. So it was very fortuitous for us to be digital in that space. And I can tell you, we worked with very large brands. One of the brands that we worked with forever was a large bank and one of the top 5s in Canada. And I remember we were doing like just an agency review, and they were talking to us back then about using AI to automate content creation. And as much as I knew about it in terms of what it could be, we're not talking about like ChatGPT, OpenAI in the past 3 years. We're talking 10 plus years ago.
Right.
So it's just these crazy conversations where most people didn't really even have, viable answers. And so the agency client relationship, I think, was very much what it should always be, like a real partnership where you have your agency partner that has such a deep understanding of not just your brand, but the ways in which it can play within certain channels and what it can do. And I'm not saying it's not that anymore. What I am saying is that I went from seeing large brands have a large marketing team with a small digital component to, in the end, there were some digital teams for major brands that had larger teams than our entire agency. So that's what, at the time people would say like, who's your competition? Internal teams, 100% were the competition. It wasn't other agencies. It wasn't traditional agencies trying to do digital. It was 100% internal teams, which fully supported by me, meaning like you should have your team be able to do this. What I think has changed dramatically now, and I can't speak to it tactically because I'm not in the agency business, but just being reflective and having my understanding and working is now on the client side because I have my own platform. I think agencies, it's kind of inversed where we all understand the power of these generative AI tools and not many people know how to use them properly at scale. And so the brands are very inquisitive of agencies that are still using very traditional means to nurture, create, build, plan, execute. I mean, we can go across a myriad of ways in which knowledge workers today are actually currently impacted by what's happening with AI and generative AI. So to me, it's just a question of where is your agency at in being that true, trusted, valued partner and actually demonstrating transparently how you're using these tools to more effectively help the brand move forward. I intuitively believe that many are probably not being fully transparent with what they're doing or not doing with these tools to be more effective for these brands that they're working with. And I don't mean that as an accusation. It just feels to me like we're not being fully transparent with what is what in terms of where you're at or where you're not.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would. Yeah. I think everybody's kind of like that. We all, like, anytime I've had conversations about AI, it seems like everybody's super confident in their ability, but question other people. Like, we're doing lots. We're testing, we're experimenting, and then you scratch the surface and you talk to somebody who's really doing stuff, you're like, oh, I'm not doing any of those things.
And that, by the way, I love those moments. So the line that I've been using with a lot of my friends and peers lately has been, if I was 10 steps ahead of everybody in the early 2000s, I'm probably only 2 steps ahead right now.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that I don't need to be transparent fully with it. I mean, I say this in a different way, meaning I like the challenge of you engaging with my content, whether it's a LinkedIn post, an article, a podcast, a radio hit that I do, and you being unable to tell if that's just me, if it's all AI, right, or if it's some combination of Mitch using AI.
Right.
I believe that that is panacea. Like, to me, that's the gold standard, is if you are still able to produce compelling content in your own voice, and that content can be advertising based, can be communications, whatever it might be. And there's an inability from the audience to discern whether or not that is ChatGPT or DALL-E or Midjourney or some type of editing tool. That's the real superpower. And I do love that. And that is what I both aspire to and work with as I'm using the tools every single day, for sure.
Yeah.
You, just before you were talking about agencies, kind of got into a little bit on the internalization side of a lot of the things that are happening right now for a lot of the bigger, definitely a lot of the larger organization, enterprise wide. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on the evolution of being highly dependent on AORs to the model that we're seeing more and more right now, especially across enterprise clients and even sometimes even these smaller ones too, that are really going down this path of just bringing that all in-house to help with speed to market, increase proximity to the business, et cetera, et cetera. There's all these great reasons why, cost efficiencies.
Sure.
How do you see that continuing to evolve over time? Do you think that there's going to be a point where things reverse back to going like more agency dependent, or do you think that ship has sailed right now and everyone's going down this one path of internalization? So
start with this idea that I presented, that the brand should own the marketing, like really be the epicenter of the brand. So start there. And then I can tell you for 25 years, 2 things were happening. One was we knew that the real win of our agency client relationship would be in making them self-sustained. Right. That was the goal. The goal was to teach them how to fish, in the old school analogy was one. 2 was, and we faced this upon acquisition, it was, well, how many agency of record clients do you have and how sustainable is this and what's their commitment to you long term? And at that point in the world, in the industry, we felt it was an antiquated question. We were able to demonstrate that over a healthy amount of time, over a decade, we could do a ton of project-based work and actually be creating more revenue than the actual agency of record if done well.
Right.
So we always use the analogy of the Pac-Man board. For those who remember the game, it's like you're just gobbling up the pellets and clearing boards. Yeah. I don't care if I'm the agency of record or not, but at the end of the year, I would hope that if I'm doing my job well, my billing is better than the agency of record billing, because a lot of times we were second fiddle. There was an agency of record when we were the digital marketing agency.
Yeah. Right.
So we were in that place of you have to build new business models around that idea.
Right.
So when you say to me, do you project a moment in time where that could go backwards? My question is, going backwards to what? Right? A world where they don't want to have any ownership of it, where on the P&L it looks bad to have marketing. I think we've progressed beyond that. And I actually think it's more incumbent on the industry to embrace this new idea, maybe forego agency of record. I mean, I just got involved in a little scuttle on LinkedIn because someone was posting about RFPs and the request for all this free work and what it is.
Okay.
And, I'm in a perch now where I can be more critical. My running joke with the agency world is every agency executive who leaves becomes a customer advocate right after, right? It's like, stop with all the marketing and the advertising noise, and like, it's about the environment. And like, we all become advocates after we exit and made some money. That didn't happen with me. I still love marketing. I'm still deeply engaged in it. But the point being that we need to see this and be realistic with what the actual industry is. And so do I think that bringing in third parties that have a deep understanding of how to build brands, maybe understand specific channels, maybe do things specifically, maybe are industry specific. So, if I fast forward, I have a friend who started a purely Shopify-based agency, and they had a very healthy exit to the same people that acquired us, 10, 15 plus 20 years later. So the model changed where suddenly they're just acquiring a shop that specializes in building out customized Shopify sites, right? And I'm not belittling that. So suddenly what happens is if you start thinking about it, you start seeing CRM-based agencies or agencies that are just focused on, let's say, HubSpot. You see the Shopify-based agencies. You see agencies that are based on performance media, some that are based off of content creation, some that even go more niche into podcasting only, or audio content or video content or influencer marketing. We see that a lot now. That to me seems like the best thing, which is suddenly you have a team. Think of it as like a baseball team or sports team, and you're bringing in the right players as you need them, and you're shifting out to keep the energy forward. I like this. I don't, even when it comes, going back to the LinkedIn battle that I had, my commentary was very simple. I don't understand why brands do this other than really wanting free work. And so if we can all agree that that's a stupid reason to do it, which I think it is, what you could say is, I'm going to meet 10 agencies. From the 10 agencies, I'm going to choose the 3 that I just like. I think they're interesting. They offer the services. I like the people. I think we get along. And then pay them to do a project. Like actually pay them, work with them. Seth Godin said a while ago, I don't want to work with you unless I know that I want to work with you. Right? And the idea is like, what is work? It's also like, you're going to do something for me, Mark, and I'm going to pay you for that work. That's what work is. Otherwise, it's a hobby, right? And I don't think all of us are spending all this time, on a hobby. So I actually think these challenges are very fixable on one hand. And I also believe rethinking what you need is powerful. I mean, I do think ThinkersOne is an interesting place where we don't have any employees. We bring in people for certain projects. We have agency partners for the bigger stuff. And while that might cost me more long-term or short-term immediately, I actually think it's a more interesting model, because as the business changes, my needs are going to change. And I want people who are spending their time very deeply working on 1 or 2 specific things that I might require. And I'm happy to pay for that.
That makes sense. It reminds me a little bit of like I've heard this reference before, but like a Hollywood model where you assemble teams of people for very specific things at a specific time. I mean, Hollywood is in the production of a movie. But you've then, as soon as that project is over, they disassemble and then you move on to the next thing. So there's lots of project-based work. I'm seeing that more and more, even for my own fractional CMO business, where there is this need, I think, for not having a full-time person and the overhead that goes along with that, but wanting some of the outputs that come with that type of a role. And so it's kind of interesting.
And there's a balance too. Like, I want to be fair to, the fact that you don't have health insurance, the fact that there's no union, like there's issues with that as well. I mean, you could go down the rabbit hole of gig economy and think, but what I do believe is that ultimately, if you're not conducting your profession as some type of entrepreneur or business, that's fine. It's not for everybody. So then you have to find the spots where you can be gainfully employed. You show up every day. Get your 401ks or whatever it is. I'm totally okay with that. I just do think that the model keeps changing.
There's so many things that I want to not pick on, but double click into, but there's so many like things that you've mentioned. One thing that coming back to, or something you said earlier around the one-to-many, like when social happened, it was the first time there was really a one-to-one kind of experience. I heard you present at an event that we held on the idea of disrupting disruption. And so I wouldn't mind if you could just kind of talk about that a little bit, in the idea of that one-to-many or one-to-one, but doing that at scale.
Yeah, I had this thought prior to coming out to Calgary for you, and I put it down on a slide, and I was kind of just going through it in my brain, and it probably came out better on stage for you than it might have in my brain. But the idea works something like this. We came from a place where it was one to many. You had a brand communicating to a very large audience. Then it came to a place where we talked about it was more one-to-one, that a brand could engage with customers, whether it's a Facebook page or whatever through social X, at the time was Twitter, whatever it might be. And then what I found was happening in a lot of the communication was this idea of but it being omnidirectional. Like we can now market back to the person and we could remarket to them. We can get them to sign up to our newsletter and do all this stuff. And I thought like that is true, but then what comes after that? Because I was trying to bridge marketing with where we're at with artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the notion I came up with was the 1 to X. And the X being the fact that artificial intelligence can simulate intimacy. So the bigger message that I had for your audience that I share with many audiences, whether they're marketing based or not, is that we have shifted from the attention economy to the intimacy economy. What does that mean? It means that if, let's say, you and I are texting each other and I ask you something and then I just get like ... I'm sitting there going, oh, like Mark's writing to me. And then, Mark like goes for a coffee or something happens and suddenly you're ghosting me.
Yeah.
But it's very personal. Like but if you notice that like a lot of even ChatGPT, when you type in the prompt in ChatGPT, it does the whole, especially with the newer reasoning models, right? It's reading, it's perusing, it'll show you websites it's looking at. And suddenly you're sitting there going, there's someone, they're doing something. Even though there's nobody there. And the theory is it could just like spit out an answer, but then it starts typing it to you like,
Yeah.
So that feels very intimate. It feels like it's just for me. And if you look at chatbots, when we use these AI generated chatbots, it's also the same. It's got the ... It's even maybe got a name. It says even typing. It doesn't need to do any of that. It's an AI. You can just go like, here's your answer. And so that was the catalyst for a bigger idea of like, now we can make it feel like one-to-one at scale, which isn't one-to-one. It's not omnidirectional. It's actually this X factor where every single person interacting with your brand may feel like they're actually speaking or connected to some type of individual, whether they're AI generated or not. What does that change in the dynamic of marketing? And I think it changes a lot. It actually forces us to really reflect on everything we're doing.
Yeah.
And I say this in a world where paying for Google AdWords or any sort of performance marketing has become so algorithmically driven and so expensive that I have now been even questioning through our own tests here with ThinkersOne of if there is more economical sense to just run of network than there is to do actually performance-based marketing because of how expensive it's become.
Yeah.
And so all of this ties into this idea of, so what can we do? Like, can you create a chatbot as an example that can go in on your LinkedIn corporate page and respond to everybody and make it feel like it was an individual? Absolutely. I mean, I see it done poorly, so I can tell that I'm getting, spammed in my comments from what somebody's just using as an AI generated comment responder to give them some type of elevation and profile. So that was the idea of this 1 to X, that it's going to be a new form of scale that's going to really force brands to rethink what marketing means in a world where attention is really hard, really, really expensive. And there may be a better way to do it by actually using artificial intelligence, generative AI to truly connect and make people feel like it's been individualized just for them.
Okay. I'm a reformed performance marketer.
Reformed, does that mean you're just going to run a network now?
It's more that Mark and I have joke about this, but all the time. But honestly, I made a career in the performance marketing discipline, et cetera. But I've seen the light, and I completely understand right now, like the evolution of what we should be focusing on, reach-based tactics, and kind of going back to talked about run of network. And I know it's a little more tongue in cheek, but like I do see that, because I think where I struggle a little bit, and again, Mark and I talk about this quite often, is the end game personalization, like really personalized?
No.
Because we don't think that's actually sustainable in any meaningful way.
No, I've simplified it. My simplification of it is you're going to be doing brand storytelling and performance. And what I think has happened is we have heavily over-indexed on the performance because it was easier, it was cheaper, and it created an immediate result. But by doing that, there was an erosion of the brand, which is why you see things like these third-party marketplaces and brands actually having a challenge in telling a great and connecting story, because we've pushed everybody as consumers into another box. And so the brands that I think that have been very successful are the ones that have started mediated against that. And they've started building. And by the way, TikTok is a great example of that, whether you love it or hate it. Brands are telling really interesting stories or using people to tell very interesting stories. I always catch myself, even on YouTube, watching, it could be a video for, the top 15 technological tools for your everyday carry. And I'm like rabbit holing in. And it's essentially a 45-minute commercial for all these different products. So, the point being that if you can create a better equilibrium between your brand storytelling and balancing that against very strategic performance, that's interesting. The other interesting component is, I think, intent changed, which is not something I hear many people in performance talk about. And I see this with ThinkersOne, because nobody is going into a search engine to say, I wonder if thought leaders do 15-minute live pop-ins, or if do thought leaders record like a 15-minute mini talk that I could just buy and run in my sales meeting. Like, I don't think anyone's looking for that. And so I'm paying for performance against thought leaders' names, against topics, against books, but I know that the individual searching has zero intent. And so what I'm actually doing off of a performance ad is trying to build brand. And this leads me to think, okay, so this model that, we're wrestling with now is obviously real. Like, maybe we made a mistake in thinking it's all performance-based, and we have to think better about how do you build a brand. So in my case, I'm a bit lucky in the sense of I have a podcast that I do every week where I interview thought leaders and authors, and then hopefully many of them are on ThinkersOne, and it becomes a way for someone listening to think, wow, that made me better at the work that I do. It made me smarter. It made me think, I would like to buy that for my team, or I should show this to my boss, and we should maybe have that person. So you can do that. And again, I couldn't sit here and tell you that performance drives better than brand or story at that point. And that's why that kind of haze came over me, where I speak to many people like you, whether they're reformed or still believe in it fully. And I get it, because there's a certain, I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but there's a certain attitude that comes when you speak to people who are deeply embedded in analytics. They have an aura to them, like they know something you don't. And they probably do. But I don't like that, because you could know something about a politician, about a brand, about anything. But ultimately, if you can't tell a story to connect those people and to believe in it and be loyal to it, even with all the data, well, no, we know that the data says that this person believes this in our customer. Okay, but you still have to connect those pieces. And continue to do so in a real form of loyalty, not just in here's some points for you to accumulate and redeem at some point. So these are the stories where I think we lost our way a little bit. I think we just started relying on this multi-billion-dollar industry and thought it's the gravy train. I mean, look, the early days of performance, the reason it worked was because it was cheaper, it was faster, and it worked. It's not that anymore. Not to the fault of the big 3 or 5 that are doing this, just because intent. The customers have become more sophisticated and have changed. So we have to connect them in different ways.
Yeah. It makes me think, when you were talking earlier about who owns the brand and structurally within an organization, what is the role for the team in marketing versus what is the role for agency partners and the gig economy, and with this idea of AI and technology coming in and having this 1 to X kind of model, it makes me think a lot about like, what is the role of a marketing department and what is the core strategic capability that they should have that isn't replicated by just bringing on an agency. You don't want to duplicate work, right?
Yeah, I think, Mark, I think it depends on where's the brand in their storyline. So if it's a brand new brand, like it's not really a brand, it's just a brand new product or service, it's a very different lift than a brand that's been part of the fabric of a culture for decades, which is also a very different lift if you are the dominating 800-pound gorilla or if you're a challenger brand.
Right.
It's also dependent on the industry you serve and how customers interact with you. Are you utilitarian by your nature? Or is there something more there? Is it B2B? Is it B2C? Are you dealing with a lot of infrastructure to get people to buy from you? Is there a large discernible market? Is there not? Is it national? Is it multinational? Is it multilingual? So I'm very cautious to say, oh, well, here's your answer. It's very clear. You do this because it depends on the life cycle. In general, most of the time when we were dealing with these large national, multinational brands, I felt like the marketing people in general didn't understand the role, which to me was quite simply, you are the custodian of the brand. Mm-hmm. The brand is going to be here long before and long after you. I've sat in reviews where it was created because there was a new marketing team and they thought, well, we should do an agency review. And we were sitting with a bench of knowledge of what works for this brand that was at a level of which it was probably somewhat intimidating and scary to the people because they're coming in like, we should change this, we should do this. And we're like, oh, we tried that like 4 years ago and this is what happened. And so I feel like the best interactions I've had both as clients and then just in the marketing agency, association, networking, speaking, thought leadership world has been with marketing professionals who understand that my job is to leave the brand in a better place than I found it. And not let their ego, because a lot of the times they're brought in to shake things up. And I agree with that as a model. I don't agree if you are striking at brand values that have resonated and worked over decades. Mm-hmm. So yes, shake things up. Maybe you need different people, different tactics, different strategies. But be very careful when you start messing with DNA, which I think we've learned even genetically as humans. We have to be very careful we start messing with that part of our biology. Brands are very much biological and they're very emotional. And that's the part where even when now let's go to the other extreme where you're just building, the brand doesn't exist. You really are both the custodian, but I think more importantly, you have to become more of a curator. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to curate, like, what is it that makes people feel this way? Is it more that like an L&D person is attached to ThinkersOne, or is it more like a small, medium business person that's like, oh my God, I saw Mitch speak on stage in Calgary. I'd love to bring this to my team, but there's not hundreds of people in the room. I can't afford a keynote speaker. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How can I do? So it's that type of thing where every day Aubrey and I are thinking of like, yes, we're going to be good custodians for it's our business too. So it's much more personal. But how do we actually curate? And again, why do I use that word? I use that word not because we think of curation, like here's a bunch of great articles you should read on the internet, but I think about it like a museum. Right? You have these four walls, you have a brand, you have an infrastructure, you have different exhibits and displays that come in. And your job is to make sure that as the customer moves through the experience, it's emotional and real and more importantly, full. How many times have you gone to an exhibit in a museum? My favorite example is I'll go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because I love music, and you'll see something like, oh my God, that's like the lyrics that Billy Joel wrote for My Life. And like you look down, I'm using an example, this may or may not be true, and it says that it's a reproduction. And I'm like, I don't want to come to a museum and see a reproduction. I want to see the
real thing. Yeah.
OG.
And so what does that tell you about brands? Like, I want it to be real. I don't want it to be, I want somebody to curate it. I'd rather not have that and have the actual Jimi Hendrix guitar or the actual, drum that Keith Moon played from The Who or whatever it might be from that tour than have it be a replica or a tour that no one really cared about and wasn't that impressive, because all of those things impact how we emote and how we connect to it.
It's funny. We've Mark and I have talked about this. Like we're almost like torchbearers in our discipline. Where in a point in time, we're now just carrying the torch for the brand, for an organization, and we're just getting ready at some point to pass it on to somebody else. And your line on we just need to leave it in a better place than we found it should be the underlining why, if you will, why we're even in this in these roles. Why is there though this celebration, and I would argue trying to like get my thoughts here in a right way, but to ask this question, but we like to celebrate disruption and we like to celebrate all these things that aren't as sexy, when in reality is if you're just a torchbearer, you're just kind of continuing on a momentum that the brand's on, that's probably should be celebrated more than every 5 years, every 3 years, people are throwing up rebrands because I'm the new guy that just came in, and this is what I believe needs to be true. And disrupting that DNA that you're talking about and pecking away at it. And we've seen time and time again where examples where that doesn't work, you know? And why is it, though, that we want to celebrate those things more than the ones that are more status quo?
We like loud. I mean, we like loud. We like crazy. We know that. We like things that are, ooh, you know. So how I would frame this is, think about it this way. If you think about what really works in advertising, I always say that it's edge emotions. It doesn't make me smile. It makes me guffaw. It doesn't make me nostalgic. It brings a tear to my eye.
Right.
Like, this is the stuff that moves us. And so if you understand like what these emotional triggers are and how customers engage with that, you can build programs and stories around that. Right. That take it a lot further and move things in a more emotional way. The challenge with that is it becomes a bit of what we see in the news cycle. It becomes a bit of the crazy. It becomes a bit of, we have to get crazier and crazier, and then it permeates everything in the culture to the point where if it's not crazy, we're not paying attention to it. So there's a bit of a duality there of, yes, your job is to not just have ripples, but to create some waves. And sometimes you need a splash to do that. You can't just drip, drip, drip. I think there's a model of drip, drip, drip that builds the ripples, that builds and builds and builds. And then there's moments where you need to create a bit of a splash, whether it's a launch or it's something. I think it's more about playing to the emotionals in an authentic way. Nobody has ever been upset if you made them cry in a way that made them want to call their parent, you know, if it's a telco company. No one's ever been upset if they took a drink of carbonated water with some sugar in it and thought, this reminds me of being a kid and being on the dock with my best friend fishing. So we have roles, and I think marketing has a high propensity for emotion in that. And we live in a world where crazy still gets attention. And so that's the balance that you have to figure out. And then, you know, we talked for many years, which we haven't talked about in forever, brand safety. Do I want my brand to be surrounded by this political message? Good luck having a brand and not being surrounded by a political message these days. So these are all like just fascinating trends and developments in humans that I find so interesting. Just think about what we went through in terms of Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, Believe Her, and brand safety of like, I need to be very careful where my brand is seen and who it's seen against to where we are at today in 2025. It's a whole other different world. And I'm not saying it's better or worse or more scary. It's going to be all of those things. But how you navigate them as that custodian is going to be important, because I do think you're right that if the psychology of the chief marketing officer is, I'm the person with the ultimate thought concept, that's why they're calling me, I think that's very different from a little bit of humility. So the example that I tell people is, if you move into an older home, our home happens to be about 100 years old, the city is very clear, like they're not going to give you a bunch of permits to do whatever you want. They have different categories and things like that. And it's very frustrating to people because I own the home, I bought the home. And the city's perspective is, yes, you own the home now. You're a custodian for it. In 100 years, there's probably going to be 2 to 3 to 5 other families that have occupied that same space. And most of the people who are in your are probably not even going to be here. And it's hard to hear. It's a hard thing to hear, but it's also a true thing to hear, that we have to approach everything. Even if you have kids, right? You're a custodian. You try to control them, try to tell them good luck. Let me know how that works.
When I know we're coming up against time, but I did want to ask a question that's related to a whole bunch of things we've talked about, including being a custodian. And I think there's oftentimes, for everybody, there's so much pressure for short term and hitting a number this week, this month, all those things. And whether you're using AI, not using AI, working with an agency partner, working inside a brand, I think all of us feel that reality. And so when it comes to leading change, and we were talking about the disruption part and like blowing up a brand every 3 to 5 years because you're just trying to make things different. So there's this idea around speed that becomes really prevalent. And when it comes to leading change in an organization, I'm curious about your thoughts on speed versus momentum and whether the custodian component fits better with like speed or momentum.
Yeah. So you're quasi stealing my final slide from the presentation, which is I'm totally fine with it because I think I'm okay with not bearing the lead in this case. When I talked about my career and trajectory, I can tell you that the minute I got that Atari 800 computer in the early 80s, there was this component of things are moving very fast. Things are moving faster than we can understand. I am guilty in the mid 2000s of standing up in front of audiences and telling them things are moving too fast and you're falling behind. This was me. And I don't know if it's my age. I don't know if it's how I've developed and how I'm thinking. And I do think I'm thinking better and communicating better than I ever have personally. I'm not saying that to be braggadocious. I just think I'm getting better as I get more ingrained in this stuff. And it was really stolen from a quote that I heard from Paulo Coelho, the author, where he said change, and it was something about change, but do it slowly and choose your direction versus fast for speed. And it clicked that like, oh, this is what's been bothering me when I get up on stages. Things are moving really fast. Everybody, you got to pay attention here. ChatGPT, and there's a new model, and there's reason, but it's really fast, really fast. And I said, but it's always fast. So why are we constantly telling people that things are going fast if it's always been fast and it's never been at a pace where everyone said, you know what, things are moving exactly as we need them to.
I like this. Yeah.
And so the answer became, so what is it? What do we actually want? You, as a partner, as an audience, as someone I'm communicating, what do I want you to do? I want you to focus strategically on a direction. So we are going to adopt generative AI. We're going to do this, and this. And then what happens is as you start doing it and adding in ideas like emergent thinking and second level thinking and other things like that, you're starting to build momentum. And then what do we know about momentum? Once you start with momentum, you don't stop. And that really crystallized a more philosophical way for businesses today to think about AI and artificial intelligence and what they need to do. Be very strategic, figure things out, use emergent thinking to test these technologies and have it give you answers and have it give you directions and things you didn't know before. And then what you can do with that is build momentum because things going fast, they're always going fast. They're just going to be faster. And if they're not, there'll be another bald person on stage telling you dressed in black that things are going really fast. It doesn't have to be me anymore. There's a whole bunch, so that's the greater idea. And I don't know how it feels or how it lands when I say it to you two or the audience. But this idea of strategy and direction and using momentum as an opportunity to build on feels to me more like real business than things are moving fast. You have to move faster. Every data point says this. We've done research that says customers want things faster and they want to be able to How is that helpful? Do you know anybody right now who wants to hear that they have to work faster? I don't know one person.
No.
Yeah.
Well, look, maybe we squeeze one more just quickly here, just off of the heels of that. And I think it's a byproduct of the economy that we're operating in, this idea. I would even argue sometimes it's, agile marketing became a thing. And even though it was one of those ideas that really was deep rooted on the tech side and like constant iteration and moving, but the underlying thought was like increasing your speed and your iteration to get to a desired outcome. And I think you're right that it's actually kind of put us in a very precarious position right now, because if we're always prioritizing speed, are we actually able to answer the questions fundamental for the business? Is like, are we driving the loads that we need? Are we being profitable the way we need to be for ourselves, for the business to make it sustainable? So in this new environment, what advice would you give agency owners or businesses who are looking to scale and adopting and kind of like adapting to this new age or new wave of technology that's going to hit us, that is hitting us right now?
I do think there are people who can give you shortcuts and say, I've been doing this for 2, 3, 5 years.
Yeah.
And how I think about it might help you think about it differently. I think with that, there are many people who do that and also provide some of that ideology basically free out into the world through channels like this, a podcast, through their writing, through newsletters, through whatever it might be. And I do believe that we've come to a place, I couldn't even tell you how many years ago, it's been decades. But my joke used to be, I had a slide that said, technology has removed technology from technology. Mm-hmm. Right? The idea being that you don't need the instruction manual anymore. It's not this complex thing where you need IT and value-added resellers to show you how to do it, that there's all these corrupted files and databases you don't understand. That any technology that's commercially available is almost already out of the box and is not something you can't figure out either on your own or with a quick 20-minute YouTube tutorial.
Right.
And what that does is it just brings down the level of which it takes for somebody to understand it and play with it and then make a strategic decision about whether or not we're going to move in that direction and then use momentum to build on that, or it's not really for us.
Right.
And so what this does is it absolves everybody listening to this of this thought that it's going to require PhDs or specialists that we have to bring in to do this, right? It's the idea that no one is coming to save you. You are going to have to save yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that that's true. I mean, especially if you're entry level, you are really going to have to demonstrate where you are adding value. Yeah. Because I can tell you right now, using these tools day in and day out like I do, that's the first challenge. And that creates a macro challenge for the industry because then you don't have people who can get better, more mature, and become leaders and senior people in that industry. So really problematic there. But this works at the brand scale. It works at the agencies. It doesn't matter. No one is coming to save you. These tools are intuitive. They're accessible. You could even, like I said, watch YouTube tutorials. You could follow along with newsletters. There is nothing that is saying that there's a bar in which you couldn't easily step over to accomplish the goal.
Right.
Now, I couldn't say that in 2000. Definitely couldn't say it before then.
Yeah.
But as things developed and where we're at now, it's almost unconscionable that you have people saying I don't know what that is, or I haven't spent any time on it. You need to be in the business of personal and professional development. I mean, that's the real truth of what we're talking about here, because if you said to me, what's going to save us in a world of artificial intelligence? I think it's primarily two things. One is individualistically, which is your agency. You need to figure out your own agency. And what that means, I don't mean agency, marketing agency. I mean personal agency of this is how I am in quote unquote control of my knowledge, my information, my skills, and things like that. And the second one, it might be surprising, but it's our desires as humans to commune. I got on a plane and I flew to Calgary, and Mark and I not only had a great event, but we had a great experience connecting. And that led us to being friends, I would say, referrals. He's referred me to video people. He's bought off of ThinkersOne. It's created something that I don't think it would have been as palpable if I didn't want to commune. And I think shopping centers are dead before COVID. Remember all of that rhetoric? And now look at shopping centers. People want to commune, whether it's restaurants, whether it's socially, whether it's professionally. That's why we go to events. And so, yes, hybrid world, work from home, remote, all of this stuff is fantastic. But even this, we are communing right now. Video provides an ability to commune like no other media before.
Right.
And so these are the things that we need to be thinking very deeply about. So if you were saying to me, hey, I'm a young person, I'm 19, I'm not sure where I want to go in my career, I would say one is figure out your agency really, really quickly. Yeah. And then if you were what's the easiest path besides maybe going down the road of trades and becoming a plumber, electrician, and things like that might not be as easily replaceable right now with AI, knowledge work being the problem, I would argue look into industries or places where people have that desire to want to commune.
Such an amazing conversation, Mitch. How can people find out more about you and the things you're doing?
Easy. You just go to 6pixels.com, mitchjoel.com, or if you want to check out ThinkersOne, thinkersone.com.
Awesome.
This is incredible.
Such a good chat.
Great. Thanks for stimulating great conversations. I appreciate both of you.
If you like this show, please leave a review. And even if you didn't, we'd love to make this show better, and your feedback will help us do that. Yes, bud.
It's time.
Okay, V.
What?
Mitch Joel.
I'm speechless, and I usually talk a lot, but I'm speechless. We genuinely did not use the outline, listeners, that we had prepared. it was just, for me, it was such a stimulating conversation that not only showcased the power of diverse backgrounds can have. Like, he talked about how he got into the discipline and how being in this curious state constantly just basically kind of also allowed him to navigate a lot of different places throughout his career. But even kind of getting down into some of the nuances of like the internalization that we talked about, and can we actually put the genie back in the bottle now? Probably not. What are these new models that we're going to be working with? I'm just right now, I'm kind of in awe of the conversation we just had, because it was so, I don't know, it challenged some of my thinking. I'm truly appreciative of his time. I that without a doubt. But I think more than anything, I'm even more invigorated in the discipline that we currently support. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm with you. I mean, there's so many. You're right. There's so many questions that I wanted to ask. That we were, especially the podcasting part. I really wanted to ask them about that, and just how podcasting, how it's played a role in his career and all that.
Yeah,
and I think the role of the podcast for him has changed as well over time. Anyway, but the things that we did talk about were awesome. Like, there's so many deep thoughts there to kind of really pick on. I think you asked the question around the disruption around, we're celebrating people who blow up brands all the time. And he came back with that idea of a custodian and leaving something better than you found it. I think that's so awesome. Like, it's a noble way to think of our profession.
I agree.
We're not, very rarely, right, is anybody. I saw one guy actually recently, shout out to Mark Lynch, celebrate 10 years at a company called Absorb Software. It's not normal.
That's not normal.
I wouldn't
no.
say like that. Somebody's at a company for 10 years now, especially in marketing. It's really interesting. So if you think about, your time at an organization, or my time at an organization, it really is pretty fleeting. So to think about it in terms of like, let's leave things better than I found it, it's really good, because then you approach things like AI, and you approach things with a sort of stance or a context of like, social, or should we do influencer marketing, or should we do, how are we going to set up the team and make decisions on who's on the team and what are we using agencies for, and all those kinds of things. It has a whole different context, as opposed to, we got to just do stuff fast because everything's happening.
Yeah.
And we got to catch up.
He talked about it a few times, but I think what I love about that approach, at the center of it is humility.
Yeah.
Right. And when you approach things that way, then you're likely become the voice of reason, or you're doing things for the right outcome. So, I'm trying to think of a real time example here, but let's just imagine, like, you go into an organization that has been very, very AOR dependent. You see an opportunity, you go through an internalization exercise, as an example. That right now is not changing the fabric of the brand. It's not changing the fabric of, how you're externalizing potentially your voice, but what you are is finding operational efficiency. That is an example of evolving with humility, but at the same time, while not disrupting the fabric of the brand itself, or the DNA. I think that's, as Mitch kind of put it.
Yeah, that was an interesting point.
And I think there's a lot of these examples, like, how do you better report? How do you better advance measurement? How do you better look at, data sets within an organization, the centralization of things like all your data signals? Like, it's little things like that that I think can create that ripple effect that he was talking about, while still not disrupting the DNA. And I think we as marketers, unfortunately, we look at the flashy thing, right? We try to get that front page. Oh, look at so-and-so's rebrand. Yeah, they rebranded 3 years ago. What? Why was the rebrand actually necessary? But we just love this whole, shining moment that usually comes at an expense that we rarely talk about.
Yeah. I also appreciate the point he made about performance marketing. And, I know you keep saying you're a performance marketer, but there's a ton of value in performance marketing. I think it just the definition of it is changing, and the expectations of performance marketing is changing in the sense that, like he was saying, it's not as cheap as it used to be anymore. Like the auction, I think one of the most brilliant things about what Google and Facebook has done is they have an auction. And so over time, it was always going to go up in price, just because it's an auction, and never will get cheaper. So that's always an interesting thing. But, it doesn't work as well as it used to anymore. And there's lots of questions around what is it actually doing? And, they're grading their own homework. So it's not to say that performance marketing is bad, but at the same time, I think performance marketing is bleeding into brand, and
100%
in that people are understanding there is value in brand. And so it is the both of them. And I think ultimately this will make us better because we're working on both sides of the equation now. And there's probably a lot more partnership between performance and the brand side than we've ever had before. Again, I keep coming back to this idea of what is the marketing team's role, and what's the agency that they have to perform and to deliver results and to build sustainable success for the organization. What is that? And he's right. There's not one answer, but it's just an interesting question, because if you're talking about building momentum, you want to make sure that the structure is in place to build momentum strategically so that you're going the right direction. Otherwise, you could just be pulling the organization apart, and the marketing investments could just be spraying everywhere instead of being cumulative.
Yeah. And I love what you just said there, because every organization's at a different state, and I don't think any of this is supposed to be like a one size fits all. You have to look at the state of your digital maturity. Let's just continue to pick on digital in the organization. Can you hit the accelerator by internalizing more resources? Or actually, because we don't have the right digital minds around us, that we can't do that. So we still need to rely on an AOR until we get a foundation in place, for example. And it's even though, let's just say, for an organization, there is this North Star of internalizing, the steps to get there sometimes can take 5 years.
Totally.
It's not just because I decided about it today that it can happen today.
Yeah.
So how do you take those first steps? If that is an aspiration, be thoughtful in what that aspiration can look like, be very methodical in how you get there. You're going to have to bring in people to help you along that path.
Yeah.
So the conversation that I think was stemmed from one of your questions to Mitch as well. It's you build these pocket of expertise around you to help you get either the job done or the job to be done, or identifying that job to be done, completing it, and then moving forward to the next thing. And that happens with specialization. And rarely do a lot of organizations have that level of specialization internally. That requires time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, well, you do know. There's lots of there's not a right answer till a lot of. I mean, it's not. I'm not even sure what the question was that we're really speaking about. But I don't know. It's just no. But it makes the conversation we just had with Mitch really makes me pause and think about take a moment and think about what it is we're trying to do. He did that a couple times, even
he did.
Go back to what? He was, he brought up some of those questions. Because we think we need to respond to something right now.
Yeah.
And have an answer. But, we don't always take a second and think, well, why? Why are you asking this? What is the outcome we're looking for? Before even thinking about an answer, just kind of putting things in a context, I think is helpful. That second level learning idea that he talked about.
I also loved his comment, no one's coming to save you.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
That's on you.
Yeah, that was really great.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, anyway, thanks, Mitch. It was awesome. Really great to have you on.
It was incredible. Very stimulating conversation. I know I'm better for it already. So,
yeah. All right, V, until the next one, you go have fun chasing profitability, which I know you're going to do this morning.
Yeah, I woke up being in such a profitable mood. I'm going to go just crush some profitability right now.
Yeah. All right, thank you to you listening for keeping us in your ears.
Yes.
We'll talk to you soon.
Chat soon, everybody.